Okay, okay. Hello, everyone from all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us in this special day, International Human Rights Day. I'm Hamed Farmand, board member of the INCCIP, International Coalition for Children of Incarcerated Parents, and founder and president of Children of Imprisoned Parents International. I'm originally from Iran, one of the country with the highest number of people in death row and executed. And there are going to be more and more people with different charge have been executed last year, especially going high. So I'm really delighted to lead this conversation with two specialists in this field, Francis Ssuubi from Bells of Hope in Uganda, and Susannah Sheffer, the health professional and researcher in the US. They will introduce themselves if something I missed and important to share, but I want to save the time because I think there are many things to talk about. And Francis told me we have a special guest as well. In my second question, I will introduce her. I hope she is here as well with us. So I want to start with Susannah, and I would like her to share with us, let us know what's the main difference between the challenge and the most negative effects of people who have not only parents or relatives in death row or have been executed, but I want to also talk about who are in the death row as well. With who have parents or relatives in prison. We know in most cases there was a gap between arrest, have a trial, and then being in death row, have sort of trying to get a parole or pardon, but fail or not fail. But there was a long period of time that children are waiting for their relative to be executed or released or convert the charge. So I want to focus first on the difference and what makes this different from the other challenge that people in this situation have. Susannah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the most direct way to talk about the difference is that when a relative is sentenced to death, they're in prison with all the challenges that you all know, plus threat of death. So it's that threat of death and the impact of that threat that makes the whole experience different, even if the relative is on death row for a very long period of time, as is certainly customary here in the US. That person, the family knows that that person is not only incarcerated, but incarcerated under threat of death. And so, for example, one of the criterion for post-traumatic stress disorder is being exposed to the actual or threatened death of a family member. So that's just sort of interesting. So if being exposed to the threatened death of a family member counts as something that can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, well, a child with a relative sentenced to death on death row they're exposed to that threatened death over all that period of time. And so, there's all sorts of examples I could give, and I want to be succinct, but if I may, I'll just share one story, because one of the things I really want to bring to you all is the voices of the people who live this experience and whom I know through my work. So of the many examples I could give, I have a quick example that happens to be from a brother. So it's a brother who was executed rather than parent in this case, but this brother speaks so vividly to your question, Hamed, that I wanted to share it, where he says that this brother says he'd always known people in his community who had family members in prison. That was common where he grew up. And he says, we all dealt with that, but witnessing death, witnessing murder is something really different. Compared to most kids my age, I had seen something they couldn't imagine. So it's that, death is different. And I'll just note here, and we can follow up later if folks are interested. There's all sorts of interesting material to consider about how children understand or don't understand that their relative is not only incarcerated, but is also incarcerated under threat of death. So I'll just note that if that's interesting, we can talk more about some of those examples, what children understand or don't.
Yeah, that's really interesting to expand it more. And I also want to a little bit focus more on the threat of death. What if the charge will be removed? What if those person not executed? So the actual death not happened. What about that threat of death that happened that was kept in for a long time with the children? Does it change if the situation change?
Well, it's very interesting, Hamed, and maybe one way I can speak to that is the experience of, and this is also a brother. I really do have many examples of where it's the parent as well, but your questions happen to make me think of young people where it was a sibling, and this is a brother telling us about the experience of his brother getting an execution date. This is how it works in the US. And then at the last minute, getting what we call a stay, where the execution would not happen that night. So it's not quite what you're saying, where it's entirely removed, but it's not right then, so relief. And this brother, the reason I'm telling this story is this brother told us with some shame in his voice that the toll that it took on him, the stress of preparing for that execution and then having it suddenly not happen was so great, the toll on him as a young person, that he found himself almost wishing that the execution would just happen already. He didn't really wish that. He dearly, dearly did not want his brother executed. But this is my way of addressing your question, Hamed, that the stress on the nervous system, on the whole body, and of course on the mind, the stress of that threatened death is so great. And here in the US, we often have more than one cycle of that threat. So that, to speak to your question, if the death sentence were removed entirely, and here what that would mean is the person were instead just sentenced to life in prison, of course it would be a relief. But the child or adolescent or grown child would still be affected by all of those years of the threatened death. Absolutely.
Yeah, speaking from my own experience of having a family person in prison and some of them have been executed, I really feel that shame. That's you have something in your mind comes through and you said, no, it's not good. It's shameful. It's really powerfully negative effects. I also have last question and then come to Francis to contribute in this conversation. My other question is, what is there? Have you found any difference? I know uh, when we spoke, you mentioned that we should add other relatives, not just parents. But if you give us, if you have any example of difference between, for example, father, any gender difference. I mean, if father was executed or in the death row or a mother, I'm asking is because in most cases, I read the Quaker reports a few years ago, and also many testimonies from our country, Iran. Most cases when the women or mother are at death row are related to sometimes the child marriage, the domestic violence, and also the killing of the husband in some cases. But for men, most of them is a difference in another person, third person from other having, if it's related to murder, in some cases not. So if you have found something in this area, have some stories or you studied about.
Yeah, I don't have stories that speak exactly to that, only because I'm not sure that the gender distinction comes up in the same way here in the US that you're describing, but perhaps I'll take the brief moment to speak to something so important that you raised when you mentioned people sentenced to death for murders that are within the family, you know, what we call domestic violence or intimate partner violence, because that's such an important point that makes me think of a story, very vivid story from, there are several, but from a young man whose father was sentenced to death for the murder of his mother. And the young man, who was a teenager, adolescent at the time of the execution, said, you know, of course it was devastating to lose my mother to murder. But if you execute my father, you're just taking the other parent from me. You know, he spoke out so beautifully about and so poignantly about how the execution didn't help him. And children in that situation, of course, are children related to the murder victim and children related to the person whose execution is threatened or is happening. So certainly that is an additional complexity. But otherwise, I don't know that I can contribute specifically to the differing effects of gender. I can speak about the stigma that I've seen the children face, you know, regardless of gender of parent, if that's of interest, or we can come back to that after Francis jumps in, as you wish.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much. Francis, I'm going to continue in this way, but feel free to share any other things that you want to add to this conversation. But I want to, when we talk about the execution and death penalty, we also, I heard and I learned that there are also other layer of stigma. Sure, can you mute yourself? Thank you. There are other layer of stigma comes through, and also if you have other factors that play a role, the race, the poverty, or other things that may play a role in the effect of parents or relatives in death row or execution. Francis. You are muted, Francis.
I was asking, can you just repeat for me the question a little bit?
Yeah. No, I want to hear from you any perspective that you have to for this conversation, but I want to also hear about the stigma around the death penalty, the more about the parental incarceration or relative incarceration itself, and also any other factors like the poverty or the class or gender and race, if you know about that play a role in the situation that children be affected.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Francis Ssuubi. I'm the founder of Wells of Hope here in Uganda, also working in Kenya and Tanzania. And I'm here to talk about the effects of the parental death sentences. And in specific, we would want to compare it with the effects of parental incarceration. Firstly, talking from a practitioner's point of view here in Uganda, when somebody is arrested for a crime like murder, automatically people start thinking that person is going to be hanged. In fact, that person is written off because people in the populace or in the population, they don't know how all the judicial system works. So they know that if somebody commits a crime that day, then probably the next day is going to also be killed, is going to be hanged. And so what does that mean? It means that person is written off. is forgotten. And how does it impact on the children? Now, just like we've discussed in other instances, the impact of incarceration on children. We could talk about sadness. We could talk about, like in Uganda, we could talk about dropping out of school, sexual rape. We could talk about, trauma and all these kind of effects that the children that have a parent in prison face. But when it comes to children that have a parent on death row or are executed, the similarities are there. There are similarities, but they are more intense with these kind of children. I would pick out something that really is so significant, that children that have a parent on death row are most likely to be mistreated more than the children whose parents are incarcerated, and maybe they hope they may come out maybe like in a day or so or a year or so. Why? Because the relatives of the children or the relatives of the man in prison on, say, a short-term sentence, they are embarrassed that in case he comes back and find that his children were not treated very well, they will get embarrassed if they don't treat the children very well. But the children whose parent is on death row or is executed is forgotten. So the relatives don't bother, don't even mind. They know that one is gone. No one will ever account or ask us what happened to the children. So they count off the person in prison on death row is counted off, and so are the children and mistreated. So they suffer more. They suffer intensely the effects of parental incarceration. Well, all these others that we can talk about, I don't want to sing to the choir because we know what these children go through. But the other thing which I can give as an example, because we have children that we look after that have a parent in prison, and this has helped us to look at the differences on how they react, the boys and the girls. The girls are affected more usually, more than the boys. And the ones who have a parent on death row react more. And one of the things is the trauma that they get that affects their mental health. We had one girl called Martha. She would get episodes of where she would just erupt and start beating people, hitting windows, and wanting to kill herself, because she had a parent on death row, and that's how she was reacting. And I could give more examples of different children. There was a girl who ran out of the house, the dormitory, and she just ran out. When he asked her in the morning what was happening to her, she was daydreaming, and she said in the dream she saw when her mother was being hanged. And this is so unfair because the parent is in prison, but the child is here and is paying the price. I don't know if I could share a little bit of my screen, some of the comments that are made by children. Can you see that?
We start seeing something, but not.
Yeah, so this is one of the comments.
Yes.
One of the boys said, yeah, he said that if you kill my father, I'll be discriminated. They'll call me names. And then this girl here, I don't know if this one can come up. She is called Rebecca. The mother had passed on, and the father was a sole caretaker by the time he committed a crime and he was put on death row. So she was now in between and was asking herself, what do I do? My mother has died. She died of a natural cause, and the father is on death row. So then there she says, my mother died. Now, when you kill my father, I will miss my parents' love, you see? So those are the kind of feelings that the children express. And I think that's what I can say for now. In this country, there have not been a killing, we have a kind of a moratorium, I should say. It's been long, probably like 20 years since they ever hanged somebody. But they have left the death penalty in the law books. the president here believes so much that it can act like a hindrance, a deterrent. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francis. It was for me give me more clear understanding of the situation. But I have a quick question from you and Susannah. If you want Susannah to add other things as well, feel free, and then go to the next question. For example, in your case, in your country, there's your organization, maybe other organization to give some sorts of services to children who have parents in prison. Is there any? You also mentioned, almost mentioned, but make it more clear. Is there any more barrier around children who have parents in a death row to get to access to those available services from the state or from nonprofit organizations? Francis.
You're asking me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so in essence, there are no barriers. The whole thing is the mindset of the people that this man is on death row, so is as good as gone, is dead, is no more. So the impact of having a parent on death row or having even a parent in prison are more intense. So those children suffer more because of just that their father is dead. In fact, sometimes they think the person dies that very day. We've had instances for people like Ben who have visited us and have participated in the tracking, or we call it tracing, of children that have a parent in prison. We went one time and traced a family. Normally there are no addresses, so we somehow struggled to get to the homes. But when we got there and we told them that their father had sent us and was interested in them joining the program to get education, they could not believe. They said, no, as he's resurrected, we believe he's dead. They told us he died, you know? And, you know, we have seen situations where children come to Wells of Hope and we think they are coming for the educational benefit, but the only thing they want to do is to find an opportunity to go to the prison. And they can't wait. They are counting days until when they go to prison to really see, is my father there? Is he really alive? Because they are told that he died. So you imagine a child living for so many years, even up to close to 10 years, knowing that the father died. And then one day they are told the father is alive by Wells of Hope. And actually they go and see the father. So that's the kind of situation. I think that's how I can answer. There's no really discrimination per se, but the whole issue depends on the mindset of the people that as soon as somebody is has committed a crime that can give them a charge, like a death sentence, then that person is gone. Or if they hear he was given a death sentence, they write off that person. And that's the same way they treat the children.
Thank you so much, Susan. Maybe it links to what you stopped in your when we talk about the stigma. I think it was I read one of your research that there was a barrier. If you can share more about this access to available, if there is any available services for children who have parents or relatives in prison. But yeah, thank you.
Yes, I will speak to that. And if it's okay, if I might, Ben posed a question in the chat that I held off on responding to in chat because I would love to be able to address it to the whole group. So if I could perhaps do that right after, that would be wonderful because it's such a good question, Ben. But to the question about access and services and so forth, there aren't services basically. And what I do for the Texas After Violence Project is direct an initiative called Access to Treatment, through which we train mental health professionals. I myself am a mental health professional, so that is my field. We train mental health professionals so that they can learn about what it is like, the very topic we're discussing today. So mental health professionals, which includes psychotherapists, school counselors, and so on, so that they can learn about the impact of a relative's death sentence on children and adults, but we're speaking about children here, so that when a child or adolescent is suffering in some way from this impact, they actually have the chance to seek help from a mental health professional who has some training and some background in this. And because that, to give you an idea of the situation in the US, as far as we know, we are the first such training. In other words, previously, even the most caring, otherwise trauma-informed mental health professional would not have had access to a training specifically about working with family members of people who've been sentenced to death or executed. So one adult told me about having sought mental health treatment years ago to discuss, among other things, the effect of a relative's execution. And the mental health professional said to her, "I have no idea how to help you." That's quite a statement. So our initiative, I'll say to you in brief, is to address that and to make those services more available. Is it okay if I speak to Ben's question as well? About the question was about the previous
Of course, yes,
story.
please.
Yes, thank you so much, Ben. I don't know if people saw it in the chat, but the question about it was, Ben, is this correct, in response to the story I had told about the young man who said, "Please don't also execute my father." Right. So great. And you asked if the U.S. judiciary would listen. It would be, in terms of preventing that execution, it would have been either the courts, either the jury or the judge at that stage, or later at a pardon board stage. And one way I can say that, stories are vivid, and I so appreciate Francis sharing so many actual stories. So I'll give you another quick example. This story is from someone who's 20 years old at the time of the story. Death penalty takes so long in the US that often when we speak of children, what I'm telling you about is grown children who are now adults, and telling you about the experience of having grown up with this. This is a 20-year-old who said, and this speaks also to secrecy in families, she said she'd always known her father was in prison. And she said, "I loved him and felt his love for me." So that's interesting to those of you that work with this issue. She, as a daughter of someone in prison, she'd felt that strong connection with her father, but she didn't know that he was not only in prison, but also in prison sentenced to death. That had been a secret in the family. The other family members had kept that from her. And she says, "I didn't know that he was actually on death row until his case was before the pardon board, which in the US is the final stage of that process, sort of the last hope." And she says the whole family we were going to go beg for his life. So she joined that effort. Imagine this, having only just learned that her father was not only in prison, but was facing execution. She went, spoke before the pardon board, just in the ways you were imagining, Ben, that she, made that plea. And one of the members of the pardon board said to her afterwards, "Did you know you are a very eloquent speaker?" And she said to us, "I'd never heard the word eloquent before, but I could figure out what it meant by the way he said it." And this is the poignant thing, of course, she thought that that meant it had worked and that she had been able to help save his life, but it didn't. And her father was executed anyway. And so she says, and this is it's another topic, but she then says, "I wonder if I had known the truth earlier, would I have been able to do more?" So this gets us into a whole other topic about children and adolescents' feeling of responsibility for preventing that execution. But in any case, I tell you the story, Ben, and all to say, sadly, probably not. That's about as good as it gets, in the sense that she gets the feedback that she's an eloquent speaker. She feels like maybe it worked, and it didn't. So, it has not historically worked that any family member saying, "This is the impact of this will be the impact of this execution on me, please don't do this." It has not been effective in stopping an execution.
I want to talk more and more, especially in this specific part of our conversation. But I will come back to this later, because it's may link to my second part of the conversation about the child right-based campaigning. So I hope we can get back to this, how the effect of putting the more pressure and more responsibility on the shoulder of children to freeing their loved one or any relatives in prison. Francis, I want to see if where is it? If you mentioned that we have a special guest today, if she's available or not.
Yeah, she's called Rose. She's using my account. You may see two accounts, Francis. So Rose,
Okay.
can you introduce yourself?
So before Rose speak to us, Rose, Wells of Hope have a club that's called the Children Against Death Penalty Club, and Rose is a president of that club. So very welcome, Rose. Can you hear us?
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Hello. How are you?
I'm fine. My name is Rose, and I am 20 years now. I finished my high school this year. I joined Words of Hope Ministries in 2013 after the imprisonment of my parents. So I've been a victim to this, and this has inspired me to join the club. This club, Children Against Death Penalty, was willingly started up by us, the children who are affected. And then in it, we've been able to write songs against death penalty, and I personally composed one. We've managed to make art pieces, and we would like to associate more with other people that are already known about, that are already known campaigning against this move. We are two death penalty. In fact, it is an irreversible torture, first of all, and it has affected us, and it has made us feel like we are not considered in the community, and prison has become our home. Like our homes are no longer our homes, because now you look for your parent, and the only place to find the parent is the prison. So the prisons have become our homes, and having a parent on death row, if say this parent is to die every day, it means that even me, the child, I'm dying every day, because now the parent is the hope of a child, first of all. And then if a parent is away, my hope is gone. Of course, I'm left hopeless. And this group, we've raised our voices, and we are not willing to cease. We are going to keep on raising our voices, and we are so blessed that some people have been joining us. The Human Rights Initiative Uganda has also worked with us, and we still need more resources. We need to get more books. Like, we would like to go advertise, move in schools, and attend conferences. Yeah, and we need our voices to be heard. So me attending such platforms, such conferences, such Zoom meetings, I am blessed and I'm empowered to work more, to add in more energy.
Thank you. Thank you so
And
much
some
for
of
joining.
the effects of death penalty in the communities.
Go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt you. I thought you stopped it. Go ahead. You want to share something else, please.
So having a parent on death row is different from having a parent who is just serving 2 years sentences, because firstly it relates back to the crime of the parent, say murder, and such a crime is unforgivable in the community. And of course, the community members may not be able to forgive the whole family. So the parent is protected by the government, but then the children are left in the hands, in the jaws of the lions in the community. So it is us to pay back for our parents' crimes. Of course, you're going to find us excommunicated in the community, because of course no one cares. First of all, if a parent is a murderer, then I am to the community. So our rights are not considered. We have no rights. We are unheard. In fact, we live in the shadows of death. We are shadows to the community, because they consider us they consider us unbelonging and unworthy to be connected within the community, because then we are moving murderers in the community. So all insults any child can face, of course, they are all piled on this one child of a parent on death row. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm gonna add another question from you, if you don't mind, and then go back to Susannah and Francis. Please share anything else you want to share. Can you tell us more about the club when you joined and now you're president of this club? How the club works and how you what you are doing. And but I saw one of your videos Francis shared to me. That was talking, dancing, singing, and the message was really powerful. And it was for me for 10 years monitoring and looking for other activists in my country that sometimes I can see that they use the image of children, not involving children. I couldn't hear the voice of children. It's more desire of the adults. But in your in that video, I could clearly hear that what you as a child said, or those children say what they want. So please tell me more about your experience there.
So firstly, this club, like, it is not like any other club in the schools. Just like if you need members, other groups, if they need clubs, if they need members to join in, they may give gifts, those attracting things to the children. But for this one, it is different. Realize that we are the voices to our parents. So realizing that, we stood up by our feet to become the voices to our parents. And of course, we go in, members join in when they are self-driven. They are inspired by the state of their parents. So in this club, every 9th of October every year, we always celebrate. We always join the World Coalition to celebrate the day against this death penalty. However, this year we were not able to of course organize it because we lacked some funds. Yeah, we didn't have the resources, didn't have the funds to call other people to join us. And so this year we weren't able, but last year we did it. And then for the crafts, we always do the crafts. And then still this year we had a prison week. Some people came and joined us. And we celebrated that Christmas week, and we were able to express about our feelings, our views about death penalty. And we were also able to join the Human Rights Initiative this year in their conference we attended, and we were able to raise our voices. And yeah, we still need more people to open their ears to us because we feel unheard, and yet we need to. So we cannot just sit down, since the fact is that we are the voices to our parents. So we cannot just sit down. So and we always hold meetings. Every weekend we hold meetings, and so far we are about 12 members in the club, but still other people want to join up, and of course we are willing to welcome them because we want to see this group grow. We want to see other people join us, and we want it to reach that international level where we can join with other affected children in other countries to come join us. Because now, since our parents, they have us as their voices, of course, one voice can't be heard. We need to strengthen the voice for the people to hear us. We've cried out to the governments, and every time we attend conferences, every time we organize for the celebrations against death penalty, we always cry out to the governments to step in, because still this is judicial. It is in their hands. So even if we cry out and they have not heard us, it is all in vain. So yeah, we may be associated with other people may join us, other people may hear us, but if the government does not consider this, then it is a wastage of time. So we always call upon our governments, call upon the well-wishers to come join us, to help us with financial assistance, because of course we need to move We can't just do the campaigns indoors. We also need to move out and raise our voices outside. And we also have our shirts. We've got the shirts that we always put on during the meetings and the conferences that can really bring out the picture of what we are talking about. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, I think as a coalition, we have to think more about this, how we can collaborate and how we can support and help. But I want to include Susannah and then Francis to this part of the conversation. What I heard from Rose, that there was a strength in that when they have their voice, but they still desire the community and in the nation and in national level to hear these voices as well. So Susannah, if you have any other good or not good practices, other negative experiences that children was involved in any campaign that's affect them or help them to be heard. So you share it wasn't kind of campaign, but children was involved, but had a lot of pressure on her on her. But can you share something about this as well?
Yes, and I may add just a slightly different angle on it just to further enrich the discussion. But Rose, thank you so much. I am just so touched and moved by your perspective and your strength. So thank you. And in terms of campaigns, there's sort of two different kinds of campaigns. There's the example that I just gave where a child or adolescent is invited to somehow participate in the effort to prevent the execution of their own family member. So that would be very specific, such as that example of testifying before the pardon board. And then there is more general campaigns where there might be an effort in the US, let's say, to change the law in a particular state, for example. And so that would be less directly about one's own family member, but more broadly working to limit or abolish the death penalty. And certainly I have seen children and young adults be involved in those efforts, whether it's, a march or visiting a lawmaker or, whatever it might be. And as with anything, I would hope that the children, we say children, I doubt it's very young children in this instance, we're probably talking older children or adolescents. I would hope that those involvements and those efforts are by the child's own choice, that, certainly I know young people who wish to be activists in all sorts of issues, including this one. So I would want that to be something that the child is choosing to do. I would love to take this moment to say also that more broadly, Hamed, in terms of your question, thinking as a mental health professional, there's an aspect of what I talk about when I am training the mental health professionals in this topic, which is about the full range of feelings that a child, an adolescent may have. And it feels important to represent that here when we're talking about child's rights. I kind of want to say, I want to include emotional rights, right to feel all sorts of things. In other words, of course, to desperately not want their family member to be executed, but perhaps also to sometimes feel anger at that family member, to sometimes resent the extreme amount of attention that this issue takes up in the family. It's a longer topic than we can get into now, but one of the things I speak about is the effect on the entire family system when one family member is sentenced to death. We can picture it, if the life is being threatened of a family member, of course, that's an emergency. Of course, the whole family is mobilized to try to save that life. That can have some very difficult effects on the others. And so one of the stories that I share in my trainings that is sort of closest to my heart, because it doesn't get talked about a lot, is the perspective of some children in a family saying of the other family members, they give all their attention to this. And of course they do, but the kids were saying, we're over here like, hello, remember me? That's their direct quote. And it's important. These are children that, this again, I'm sorry, it was their brother, but they did not want their brother executed. They were in agreement with that effort, but they were also experiencing the effect of the whole family being organized around that effort. So part of what I like to sort of speak about is one way to support children is to allow them to be nourished in other ways, to be supported to grow and develop in ways that are not about the death penalty, you know, and maybe a child very much wants to visit their parent on death row, in which case should be helped and supported to do that. Maybe that child needs to not do that for a little while. Maybe that child or adolescent says, I need a break from that, let's say. You know, so that one of the recommendations I give when I talk about this is, you know, ask the child about desired contact, or, you know, it might change over time, or it makes space for the range of feelings that a child might have. So when we're talking about, as you rightly say, Hamed, children's consent versus imposing on children, I think that it includes activist campaigns, but it also includes the whole range of involvement with this topic. So thank you for letting me sort of take the question more broadly.
Thank you so much. Always you make it more broad and more expanded. That's really great. Before open it to open discussion with great audiences here, all have some sort of experience and knowledge. But if you want to share something else, Francis, please, and then I will ask anyone to want to add more value to this conversation, please. You are unmuted, Francis. We can't hear you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so concerned about the resolutions that were made by the United Nations concerning children that have a parent on death row and executed. And I don't know why it all stopped at that time when we had the UN Council meeting, and maybe a few follow-ups were done by CUNO, but I would have desired to see an implementation done to follow up with the different states, especially to ensure that these resolutions are domesticated. The laws are made domestic. Simple things like children having access to their parents, visitations, like having information concerning their parents. I think that is something that is doable. We're not talking about, one person who inspired me in this work is Rachel Brett. And I remember when we had the informal meeting on this subject, and she was saying, we are not talking about abolition. We are talking about children enjoying their rights. So I want us to carry forward that information. We're not talking about, obviously, abolition will be the best thing for the children. But right now, we're not talking about that. We are just saying, can they enjoy their rights? And there's just simple things. Visitations, make them friendly, as long as the children are not disturbed, or in general, as long as they're child friendly. And also, can they have information? Like, one of the things that is killing the children and traumatizing the children here is lack of information about their parents or what's going on. Because if someone is living with a lie for 10 years that the parent died, and later on they discover the parent didn't die, I think that's not good. They need information. Yeah, so I'm calling upon to ourselves and whoever can help, or in whatever we can do it, to re-energize this conversation that we began that time at CUNO concerning the rights of these children, and especially making sure that all these resolutions that have been passed are put in place. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francis. Anyone in this room, if you want to share, Rachel, you're here. We would lovely to hear from you if you are okay with that. And any other person. Yes, please, Rachel.
Thank you, and I'm so pleased that you're picking up this issue. And as I said in the chat, thank you especially to Rose. It was great to hear your real experience and your activism. But since Francis has specifically sort of questioned me, I'm not with QNO any longer. But that doesn't mean that I don't care about this issue, because we were involved in it, and I agree that I get frustrated that it doesn't seem to have moved further forward. A couple of things. One is that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights does produce reports and includes this issue in those reports. And so one thing that people could be doing, and this I'm looking at Rose as well in particular, to make some input to those reports with the perspective of the young people themselves would be great. Secondly, next year there is a UN Crime Congress. This is the big every 5 years event. And if anyone was in a position to attend that and organize, there's usually a group working on the death penalty who do at least one event there, and either join with them to do this specifically or organize a separate event that would address this issue. I think that would be a brilliant way of actually putting this really back onto the UN agenda. And that one of the things at that Crime Congress, I think, I'm not certain because I haven't done this bit for quite some time, is the actual report on the death penalty, which the UN Office on Drugs and Crime produces. So that's something, another possibility to look at. In the chat, so I'll just mention it. I believe that after I'd retired from the Quaker UN office, they produced a report on the legal issues around children of parents sentenced to death. And I put the link to that in the chat. And I understand that in at least one case, the lawyer picked this up, the lawyer of the defendant picked this up, and the judge actually did take account of it and did not impose the death sentence. And that was in the US. Now, I think that's probably a very unusual case, but it's worth knowing that there are good legal arguments. There's lots of other human rights and humanitarian arguments, but it might be worth, if you know any lawyers who are doing death penalty cases and there are children affected by that, it might be worth them, trying to alert them to that resource as a possibility to actually be working within the courts. Thanks.
Thank you so much for bringing some opportunities and some hope to Jake. Susannah, please, and also if you didn't read the chats Dr. Hart added, I want to
Yes.
talk about that as well. Thank you.
That's what I was exactly. Thank you. I was wanting to speak to exactly that, and to welcome Sandra Joy, whom Francis mentioned. So the question about Kenneth Doka's concept of disenfranchised grief, that was a concept. Doka did not coin that concept specifically to refer to family members of people who've been sentenced to death or executed. It's the concept of disenfranchised grief in general refers to grief that cannot be publicly mourned or socially supported. It is my colleagues Sandra Joy and Elizabeth Beck who brought that concept to this topic. So I'd love to have Sandy jump in. I'm going to tell you a really quick anecdote that illustrates this exactly, because you're so correct that it directly applies. And here's the most vivid illustration of this. We're speaking in general terms, but here's the most vivid illustration I can offer you. This is the daughter of an executed man who said, and again, as my stories often are, she was a child and adolescent during the whole process, but is now an adult when speaking of this. She says that after her father's execution, a friend said to her, I don't understand why you feel bad. In other words, the friend is essentially saying, I don't recognize this as an occasion of grief. I don't understand this as a loss. You can imagine I share this in every single talk or training I give. I can't think of a more vivid illustration of this otherwise seemingly abstract concept of disenfranchised grief. Grief, it's not recognized as such. I don't understand why you feel bad, right? So absolutely to the question, yes, indeed. Yes, it is a very apt phrase for this phenomenon. And there's a kind of additional, I'll quickly say, I'm sorry to keep taking the floor, but there's an additional component we've discovered where not only is the grief disenfranchised, in other words, not recognized as grief, I don't understand why you feel bad, but another family member here, and this is someone who, she was a child, or young adolescent, it was her uncle who was executed. That's just interesting as a different relative. She remarks that the experience of seeing people outside the prison cheering, celebrating on the night of her uncle's execution showed her that not only is this loss not recognized as an occasion of loss, but people are actively seeking and in some cases actively cheering for that loss. And I just wanted to take care to mention that here because it's such a distinguishing characteristic of this kind of loss. It's both invisible and unrecognized, but also by some actively sought, and children are going to know that and be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Sandra, please.
Thank you so much. And Susannah, you anticipated a comment I was going to make. That's wonderful. You've made so many great comments today. Yes, the disenfranchised grief is complicated further by even perfect strangers reveling in the impending execution of the parent of the children. And I've had family members say those things to me as well. And even so harsh as you should be happy that the state is taking this demon seed, quote unquote, out of your family. So not only should you not be sad, but you should be happy. So a lot of that happens. I just wanted to add something really quickly to the wonderful comment Susannah made earlier when she spoke to the fact that children sometimes need breaks because of the intensity of this involvement. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. To the extent that it's possible, and this is case by case basis, obviously depends on the nature of the crime and the involvement of the family in that crime and the position where the amount of growth that I'm trying to lower my hand. There we go. The amount of growth that you see in the incarcerated parent when the child needs to take that break, if it is all possible and the case is warranted, to involve the typically father, although sometimes mother, on death row in that process by, particularly if it's a teenager, having them write a letter or have a phone call with the father in a therapy session would be even better to express that need for a break. Because while it seems to, and it does in part, advocate on behalf of the stress that break brings to the loved one on death row, it also can alleviate some anxiety from the child in terms of how that break is going to be perceived. Because I've seen teenagers take those breaks without telling the parent because they didn't know how to say it. And then they're very angsty about how their father is maybe mad at them because they haven't checked in. And so if you can help them exercise their agency and communication with their parent in a very assertive and calm way, say, Dad, look, I love you, but right now I'm really trying to focus on my SAT exams or, getting ready for graduation or whatever, that I just really need a little bit of a break. And then that father understands why I've been in the middle between men on death row and their children so many times where the children have taken these breaks without communicating that. And the fathers are like, I don't know if I should keep writing. I keep writing and I don't hear anything and it hurts my heart. But if the child had simply, through the support of a therapist or a mentor or somebody on the outside, communicated that to the father, then or mother on death row, then that could go a lot more smoothly, not only on behalf of the person on death row feeling less rejection and less stress, but also the child not having to worry about how that break is being perceived, because it becomes even more complicated when you're taking a break from your parent, from visiting, from the phone calls and focusing on things that a child should be able to focus on, it becomes more complicated if in the back of their mind, they're worrying about how that break is being perceived by the parent. So whenever possible, not only in this scenario, but overall, the therapist is able to act as a liaison between the child and the parent on death row to help both parties understand. And it's not easy because the parent can't come to a session, but you can certainly schedule a phone call for a death row parent to call in during a therapy session and communicate that desire. And you can leave it up to the child if they have enough assertiveness to do it on their own through a letter or through a phone call. Great, but if they need that support of a therapist, I think that's really helpful. So thanks.
Which is exactly why I'm working to have there be more therapists in the US who can help with this. It's such a perfect point. And I just really quickly say, because we want more questions, that even prior to that wonderful idea, chronologically prior, might be a therapist or other supportive mentor helping the child or adolescent even to figure out that they want that break, as you were saying, want or need it. So it's just such a perfect point here that part of this, going back to Hamed's question about child rights really includes making space for whatever the child might actually need and be experiencing. And sometimes that can get sort of swept up in the constellation of what everybody else is wanting and needing. So thank you so much, Sandy.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to turn my camera. I'm about to run to teach a class out of prison, but I'm be listening as I'm driving. So thank you so much for this wonderful program. I'll be continuing to listen. Thanks.
Thank you for adding this important importance point at this conversation. Said mentioned asking question. I'm not sure who was willing to talk. Maybe if Rachel, could you could also contribute, or Francis. She asked the question about how's it possible to apply the best interest of the child principle in death penalty cases. I think it was a legal case question. Is based on your experience, would you recommend reading example of practices of legal framework that court consider after the issuing their verdict to protect the rights of the affected children? If anyone have idea about this question?
I can speak to it if you like.
Sure. Please.
Yeah, I mean, sadly or unfortunately, again, speaking only in the US context, which is all I'm qualified to speak to, it's sort of two different matters. In other words, the question was about the verdict, and it would actually be the sentencing here. It's unlikely that speaking about the rights of the child will kind of have anything to do with the sentencing of that individual. It hasn't been tried yet. I have talked to some lawyers who have raised the question about whether somehow at the sentencing phase, bringing in the notion that death sentence and execution would have a harmful effect on the children in this family, and so perhaps that is a reason to sentence to life rather than death. But it hasn't. There've been all sorts of reasons, maybe longer than we can get into now, legal reasons about why that's thought to be just speculating. In other words, you can't, I know it sounds silly to those of us who think this way, but the legal notion is that you can't prove that it will have a negative effect. It's kind of a speculation into the future. So in terms of actually affecting the sentencing, I think that's very difficult. But child rights, if that's our framework, and as Francis mentioned, can come up in so many other areas in terms of how is everything handled and what are children told, that whole important question about information that Francis raised, and right to visitation, right to not visit. There's all sorts of other ways in which the children's rights can be brought in. If we're talking about framing the death penalty as a public health issue, where we're drawing attention to the negative health impact on family members, including children, that we hope can be a way to generally raise awareness about the harmful effects of the death penalty. In other words, it wouldn't necessarily make a difference in any specific case, but overall, culturally, societally, raising the awareness that this is a practice that harms people who have not committed any crime, and specifically children, we are hoping that that is an idea that does gain traction.
Thank you. Rose, if it's okay, I want to bring you back to the conversation and raise another question and start wrapping up our this discussion. You mentioned in your when you speak, you mentioned what you desire from the community, from the globally, how to support not your organization, not this the voice of the children. And Rachel also mentioned that as well. But could you also more specifically talk about the role of other members of the community, for example, in the school, in the librarian, the other members in who you are dealing with them, what you desire, what your what you wish they do better to support you in your journey and in this this situation that you have.
That for me or
Okay,
Francis?
thank you. Firstly, they have to recognize that we are also children and we deserve our rights, and they should open up their ears and listen to whatever that we say about death penalty. And then the other thing, we also wish to be heard, to be considered in the community. So these people around us, they should, and it is not us. And of course, as children, as we also expect we are to campaign against it, say in the name of our rights. Of course, we demand for them to put this under consideration. And still to our teachers, of course, the teachers, like many people around us, they know about death penalty, but since they live with us, the victims, of course, we've been able to convince them to join us in the move. And of course, yes, the people around us, because firstly, you find that the parent was imprisoned when the child was young, and of course, we don't understand what death penalty is. But these bigger people, the older people around us who are there in that time of imprisonment, of course, they knew what went on. And of course, we expect them to open up, explain us what death penalty is, what incarceration is. Bob, he's called James, and for him, his father was imprisoned when he was 3 years. And of course, he was telling his story to us, and he was like, I reached at that time when he had made around 7 years, and he was like, hey, my auntie, where is my dad? And even the aunt didn't know where the father is. Of course, she knew that the father was imprisoned, but for her, all she knew is that the dad of Bob had already passed on, they had already executed this father. And all she said that your father died. So for him, all along, he stayed knowing that the father was dead, and yet the father was still there. And to cut short, to be concise, the father is still on death right now, and this Bob has grown up and is one of the great members of the club. And one of our most cry is that we should be made aware of what incarceration is. We should be aware of what is going on with our parents. We should be aware that, of course, our parents did this, and this is happening because of this reason. Because there it is easy for us to catch up, to have hope. Because then if you know the parent is in prison, of course, you know how it is. And of course, maybe the blame to the community might be lesser, because now I'm aware my father, my mom did something wrong. And still, to that point, does not mean that we should be unconsidered in the community just because we realize the mistakes of our parents. And the other thing, in the community, we expect these people to join with us, to boost us, like to promote our talents, just like other children, because of course we've got talents, and of course we are the leaders of tomorrow. And we are the leaders, we are the lawyers, we are even the presidents of tomorrow. And of course, we should be empowered just like any other children, because the dream of any child is being considered, of course, and being considered and being valued in the communities. So the people around should value us also, because we are also people, and we are their people. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. For me, it was the best part of this conversation. And yeah, I heard the opposite. That's one as just one example. There was many. The one child that was involved in the campaign against the death penalty of his father, and then he was tragically executed, but no one told the child. So the child was wishing and asking, not telling from his voice, just writing something from the adult and give it to him and show it the poster and take a picture, and then nobody told that child that your father was gone. So that was, I think, really raised many, and this one important point. Francis and Susannah, please, could you also contribute in this part of the conversation and see what else you, Susannah mentioned that what you are doing, and you think it's important, I believe that really important, to train other professionals who understand this challenge and could respond to that. But any other ideas you have in your mind? And Francis, also, please, how we can make the not only state accountable and responsible, but also the communities, as you mentioned. It's a public health, not just one person's challenge.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing the central goal that underlies any idea is recognizing that this counts as trauma, that this is an experience. I can't convey enough, and I'm sure this is true in your own context, the extent to which this is a phenomenon that has been just unrecognized. People say, I never heard of it. I never thought about it. I never thought about the family members. People say that so commonly. So just having, it sounds just, but it's actually quite significant, having school teachers and school counselors, you mentioned librarians, that's so interesting to me, Hamed, just having people in the community who might encounter young people aware that this is a possibility, that not only might the child have a relative in prison, but that child might have a relative who's in prison facing threat of death, so that if the child says it, or if you're asking questions, and if you're, let's say, a professional taking a history of that child, that you think to ask it, you think to be aware of it. An interesting example that comes up in school here that I don't know if this is only a US context or would happen elsewhere, but one adolescent whom we interviewed said that one thing that was difficult for him is when in his school classroom, the death penalty came up as a topic to be debated. It's sort of an interesting thing that will come up here in the US. It's one of the political topics that a high school class might be studying or might be invited to debate, the death penalty, pro and con, without any thought that this might be a very, very personal issue for a child in that classroom or an adolescent, that it might be something that they are so personally affected by that they just can't actually participate, in that debate. So having some awareness that this might actually have personal meaning to someone here, being aware of when the child is being taunted and stigmatized. I have a very moving testimony from one teenager who talked about going to school and being teased and taunted horribly because she had the same name as her family member whose case was very publicly in the news, and I'm sure we all have those kinds of stories. So if schools and others who come in contact with children are just aware of these possibilities, I think then the actual ideas, the implementations kind of follows from that, because good caring people who work in schools or libraries or wherever else will know what to do. I guess I have that optimism. We'll have some sense of how we can take care of this once they're aware this is a possible identity. This is a possible trauma that a child is experiencing.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Rachel. Will put some important comments and sharing some links to the chat, and also I also put the link to the call for input from the special rapporteur on the extrajudicial summary or arbitrary execution call for input for rights of families of victims of extrajudicial summary or arbitrary execution, unlawful death. It's really soon. I hope some of you have something to share already knows about it, but it's December 20th, the deadline for the inputs. I also put that as well. Francis, in the last few minutes that we have, if you have something to share as well, anything else, or to continue this part of the conversation, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wouldn't want to repeat what Susannah said, but we had here a live example in Uganda. There's a top school here, and the teacher was teaching about the death penalty in Uganda. And so one child puts up the hand and says, what happens if someone is sentenced to death? Are they going to be killed? And how soon? And so the teacher says, oh, right away, they'll kill you. And there was a girl in the class whose father was on death row. This girl collapsed and had to be taken out of the school, had to be taken to hospital. So what you're saying, and like I normally say, for those who know, like Kayla, you know, I've said this at your conference that issues that affect children that have a parent in prison generally, they are transnational. They are transnational, and that's how I opened the topic at the Prisons Families Conference back then. And I want us to look at it that way. And let me add on to that, that if we are talking about this subject, let's not limit it to just certain portions of the globe. You know, if the Americans are talking about it, if the Europeans are talking about it, if the Africans are not talking about it, how can we help a few voices in Africa? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm so emotional. How can we make these voices heard everywhere? Because there are places in the world, like I imagine, like in Asia, in like the Arab world, you know, you never hear, like even right now, the people who are attending here, we have few people represented there. So how do we get these voices out there? So I would ask that bodies like COP, and maybe the European Union to be particular, they could extend their tentacles and bring everybody together. We're not talking about politics. We're talking about children's rights. So I'm asking that if we could have a consortium and get these ideas together and help children everywhere. Simple things that we need, simple things that children are asking for, to get information to them, for them to be heard. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really important things to talk about. And I'm really glad that we talk about this conversation. It was for me a little bit personal, and then not only in the family member, also in the country I come from, and the advocacy that I do, but also it was really great to hear your experience, and we are on this same page. Hopefully we can do much more about this. I want to just say thank you so much for Shine for Kids to in a very late time in their time zone managing this conversation. And our yeah, Rose, please, if you want to say something else. Or yeah, and the INCCIP, the National Coalition for Children.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, I had to do this first. First of all, some of my experience in the community. First of all, my mom and dad were both imprisoned and were sentenced for 60 years. It was not death penalty, but for me, it relates to death penalty. It relates to that because sentencing someone for 60 years, it is the same as being sentenced to death penalty. So both parents, imagine being away and you're left just in here. So, first of all, some of the effects to that is that I couldn't even associate with other children in the community. And first of all, and all along I knew that they don't know, they are not aware of my story. They are not aware that even my parents are in prison. And it was in 2019, my dad happened to pass on in prison, so he died, and my mom continued serving the sentence. And just on the very day, or that day when he passed on, a young boy of about 13 years happened to come home. And to my surprise, he knew my story, and he started telling me, and in fact, we were beside the road, and he was like, "For you, your dad is a murderer. He murdered someone. Sorry for that. And your mom is still in prison. You are a murderer, you are a child of a murderer." And just imagine, this is a child of 13 years, a person that I should be hanging out up with, a person that I should be having games with. And it is this person that is yelling out that you're a murderer. So imagine, not only the big people, not only the adults that understand, like could maybe be that could maybe understanding what my parent did, but even my age mates, my young fellows, my fellows, and they are made aware of my status, of course. And to say, we find ourselves that we are ashamed of our identity. Of course, you go somewhere and you can't just express out. Someone may ask, "How are your parents? And can we know about your parents?" And in fact, you can't say that my mom is in prison and is serving 60 years. So I find myself in a state that I have to hide my identity. Yet to anyone would be like, anyone would like to have that right of expressing herself, telling the people about the status, their identity, saying that my mom is at home, my mom is this and this and that and that. Up to me, of course, I can't say that even to my fellow children. So that day, and he said it at a very long time. That time was wrong. It is a time when I had lost my dad, in fact, in prison. And all my minds were like, even my mom, you never know, in just an hour, my mom, we are gonna get a message that even the mom has passed on. And it's such a state where your fellow, in fact, your friend may say, sorry, where that you may need consolation of your age mates, and it is an age mate insulting you in such a manner. So it was such a hurting experience. And to a surprise, this has become our new normal. Like, we've learned to say it's okay when it isn't okay. So it's okay has become a part of us. And of course, that is one of the words I don't like, because even when I'm not okay, we've let hurting moments to be okay in our lives. And to that, I may say that mental illness is incurable in us. So the doctors may try to heal us, to try to come up with a solution to solve our mental illness, but of course it cannot, if I may say, because this is something that keeps bouncing back every day. That's why I say that if a parent is dying every day, it means even me, a child, I am dying every day. So killing a parent is killing a child. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's very important steps to hear the voice of you and other children. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to trust us and share with us your experience and raise your voice here. I hope we can do much more to raise that in a very different level as well. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your participation, for being here, listening to us, and sharing your experience and knowledge. And also, we will share this video in our in the channel, the YouTube channel of the Kids Shine for Kids, and also the INCCIP website. And we go forward. Thank you.